Syracuse football picks up 3 commitments in the class of 2025, but misses out on 4-star quarterback Malik Washington, and the Cuse lose 2 players in the class of 2025.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we are going over Syracuse football recruiting. The Cuse picked up a trio of 2025 commits recently, but Malik Washington went to Maryland as expected, so Syracuse misses out on a 4-star quarterback in its class. And a couple players decommitted from the class of 2025, but I'm going to tell you why I don't think it's that big a deal that a couple players have decommitted from Syracuse, although I wish they were still committed, right? You'd rather committed than not committed, but not that big of a deal. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Let's start this podcast off talking about the trio of 2025 commits to Syracuse football recently, all in the class of 2025. Quarterback Rich Belin, defensive lineman Nathan Nyandoro from Canada, and wide receiver / athlete Gabe Daniels, all recently committed to Syracuse football in the class of 2025. Let's start off talking about the quarterback commit, Rich Belin, 5'11", 195 pounds from New York, New York. He is a 3-star quarterback. He started his high school career as a wide receiver, but then switched to quarterback 2 years ago. And I have a feeling that this kid can really rise in the rankings because he was the New York State Player of the Year last season. The New York State Player of the Year. And he's only been playing quarterback for 2 years and is already a 3-star. And I know sometimes we diminish 3-stars, but you still got to be really, really exceptional at football in high school in order to be a 3-star recruit. And Rich Belin has been playing quarterback for 2 years and has already gotten himself to a 3-star rating. And he was just the New York State Player of the Year. So this is someone who I believe can really, really rise in the rankings if you just give it a little bit of time. His older brother, by the way, Henry Belin, he plays quarterback for Duke, so a little bit of an ACC rivalry there. And his younger brother, Blake, is a 3-star defensive lineman who Syracuse is also pursuing. So we could have 2 Belins on the team. Rich has said about the system that it is, quote, extremely quarterback friendly as the game plan changes and adjusts to whoever is running the show. So obviously what Rich is saying there is that he thinks the offense is very suitable for him and for any quarterback for that matter. And he's really speaking about Jeff Nixon's offense, the new offensive coordinator. And to be honest with you, if his offense is really quarterback friendly, which I hope it is, then Kyle McCord could have a really big year if we're just talking about this year. But regarding Rich Belin, he's saying that the system is very quarterback friendly. The coach has built a relationship with him, which obviously we know is important. And he's got a ton of upside, already the New York State Player of the Year, and he's been playing the position for 2 seasons. Imagine playing something for 2 years or doing something for 2 years and being the best at what you do in whatever state that you are in. That is highly, highly impressive. So I'm looking forward to seeing this guy in an orange uniform. And hopefully, as we monitor his progress throughout next year, which will be a senior season, he can really rise in those recruiting rankings because he really can. It's definitely possible given his upside. Moving on, let's go with someone who might one day be catching passes from Rich Belin, and that is wide receiver Gabe Daniels, 6'1", 180-pound athlete / wide receiver from Norcross, Georgia. He is a 3-star recruit once again. He chose Syracuse over schools like Kansas and also NC State, but he took his visit to Syracuse. He was supposed to visit NC State, but canceled it. And then he did visit Kansas before ultimately choosing to end up with Syracuse. So Gabe Daniels, Syracuse. We're talking about 2025 recruiting here. National scouting analyst Hudson Standish, he recently in an article told Mike McAllister about Daniels and mainly about what type of receiver he is, in that he is a, quote, field stretching wide receiver. If you don't know what a field stretching wide receiver it is, think of someone who can take the top off the defense, a major deep threat, someone who you just say go long and stretch the defense, right? The safeties all of a sudden have to play back. That opens up the middle of the field for those underneath wide receivers. That's what a field stretching wide receiver does. It's why they're so valuable. The main one on the planet right now that everyone looks up to is Tyreek Hill because he is the best field stretcher out there. This is another guy who can really rise in the rankings as well because, as Standish pointed out in the article, he is a field stretching wide receiver. So he clearly has speed, but he is a 3-star recruit. So that means he needs to work on his other skill sets, right? He needs to maybe work on his hands, his route running. But you can't teach speed. If you have speed and you have size, you can teach skills. You can teach someone to be better at running routes. You can. You can work on the jugs machine for a while and catch a ton of passes and work on your hands. You can do that. But I can't make you run faster. I mean, the coaches can't make you run faster. Me, I can't coach you at anything really in football. But you get what I mean. You can't teach speed. So the fact that Gabe Daniels has speed means that he has upside and hopefully his other skills develop and he can become more than just a field stretching wide receiver. Field stretchers are just so valuable. You need them. It's oftentimes, if you look at the NFL draft, a player's 40-yard dash for wide receivers will vault them up draft boards, and it will also sink them in draft boards because NFL talent evaluators will often place a lot of emphasis on getting field stretchers because you need to back up the safeties in order to really unlock the middle of the field with your other wide receivers. So getting Gabe Daniels is very, very nice. Hopefully, once again, he develops and maybe becomes a 4-star recruit. Maybe he's still got another year of high school football before he gets onto campus. So those are the two offensive players that Syracuse has gotten in its class of 2025, quarterback Rich Belin, the New York State Player of the Year, and wide receiver Gabe Daniels, a field-stretching speed demon that Syracuse has added. Let's now shift to the defensive side of the ball. A player from Montreal, Canada, the hotbed of football, as they say, Nathan Nyandoro, 6'6", 260-pound defensive lineman. He chose Syracuse over schools like Oregon State and Boston College. Speaking about his visit to Syracuse, he told Mike McAllister, "We did a bunch of cool things, got to play golf for my first time, which was a fun experience. Best part would just be the meals with the coaches and players, which lets me get to know them on a better level." Nyandoro, speaking about his visit to Syracuse, overall, it seems like he enjoyed it based on that quote. And I just want to point out that golf, you might have enjoyed yourself now, but golf is incredibly frustrating. And the more you play, the more frustrated you get. That's all I'll say. Everyone that's played golf knows this, though. If you play golf, you're going to get pretty frustrated. It's just how it is. The ball just doesn't go where you want it to go. And the way I get around it, honestly, is I just blame the clubs, not my swing. It's never my swing. It's always the club's fault. It's always the putter's fault. It's always the sand's fault. It's never my fault. That's the way you get around it in golf. That way you never really are frustrated with yourself. You just get frustrated at, your clubs that clearly have a hole in it. Aside from the golf thing, it's another sign that once again, this coaching staff does a great job of building relationships with these kids. He literally said it. Nathan, in that quote, literally said it. The coaches did a great job building relationships, the meals. When I played travel hockey growing up, mealtime with my teammates was honestly some of the most memorable experiences I had, aside from playing hockey. So those are the times where you can build relationships. It's off the field. You can talk about more than just football. This coaching staff really has done a great job of building relationships with these kids, which in turn gets them to want to play for you. So it makes a lot of sense. Overall, in terms of the player, he's got good size for a defensive lineman. So once again, you can't teach speed. You can't teach size. Hopefully, he can develop his skill set and become a really effective player when he gets on campus. So those are the trio of recruits for Syracuse football in the class of 2025. Overall, I would give it a thumbs up. I am pretty happy about it. We got Rich Belin, the quarterback from New York, the New York State Player of the Year. We got wide receiver Gabe Daniels, a field stretching threat. And Nathan Nyandoro, a 6'6", 260-pound defensive lineman from Canada. So that is it for the trio of recruits for Syracuse football in the class of 2025. Now coming up, a little bit more of a somber tone. Not really a somber tone, but it's not going to be about new players coming to Syracuse. It's Malik Washington deciding to go elsewhere. Syracuse, we hoped would get him, but was not favored to. And players decommitting from Syracuse. You never want to see players decommit, but obviously we wish them the best of luck. So we're going to talk about all of that after this. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel's letting me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. And we're talking about Syracuse football here on today's podcast. And if you're itching for football season like I am, guess what? FanDuel has released the odds for Syracuse's first game against Ohio. The Orange are 15.5-point favorites to get the W to open the season. You think the Orange can cover? Well, bet it right now on FanDuel. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. A free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, it's Syracuse football recruiting once again. The Orange picked up a trio of 2025 recruits, but now it's time to talk about a trio of players that will not be attending Syracuse in the class of 2025. Let's start off with first a player choosing to go elsewhere. That is quarterback Malik Washington, 6'4", 200 pounds from Severn, Maryland in the class of 2025. He did take an official visit to Syracuse. They were certainly in the running. He was an athletic pocket passer, as I have said here on this podcast. At the time of his commitment, he was the second best quarterback in the country that had not yet committed to a school. Syracuse wasn't expected to land him. And lo and behold, Malik Washington went to the school that we all thought he would go to, which is Maryland. So congratulations to four-star quarterback Malik Washington on his commitment to Maryland. The reason why I would say this isn't too big of a deal is because I think most of us were expecting that Malik Washington was not going to pick Syracuse. It's like the comparison I would give is, if we're going to go to basketball for a second, Syracuse recently got Sadiq White. And it was expected that Syracuse was going to land Sadiq White. I think we all had that feeling going into the decision that he was going to choose Syracuse. If he didn't choose Syracuse, that would be a huge problem. What went wrong? What happened? Why were we the favorites and then we didn't get him, right? So with Malik Washington, kind of the same boat, but on the opposite end. We weren't really expected to get him, even though we were in the hunt for him. He was expected to go to Maryland, and so he ultimately does go to Maryland. It's not that big of a deal. Plus, literally the night before the decision, Rich Belin committed to Syracuse. It was back-to-back. So Rich Belin committed to Syracuse, a 3-star quarterback, New York State Player of the Year. And to be quite honest with you, as soon as that commitment happened, that they got him, I had a feeling that even Syracuse knew that Malik Washington was going elsewhere. It was just the feeling was in the air that we weren't going to get him. It's not that big of a deal as much as I would have liked one of the best quarterbacks in the country coming to Syracuse. It's not that big of a deal. We were all expecting it. That's basically the point that I am trying to make. So Malik Washington, wish you nothing but the best over at Maryland in the Big Ten. And who knows, maybe we will see you soon. Anyways, let's move on to the couple of decommitments from Syracuse football. Let's start off with Sharlandiin Strange, 6'2", 220-pound edge from Pennsylvania, Rivals 4-star recruit. He was the highest ranked recruit in Syracuse's class of 2025. Mike McAllister said through a source that junior college is possible for Sharlandiin Strange, as well as the other player, Amari that we're going to talk about soon, and why ultimately they might be decommitting is going to junior college. I was bummed by it, especially Sharlandiin Strange. He was the best recruit that Syracuse had in its class. Of course, I was bummed. But again, these kids make the decisions that are best for themselves. Commitments happen all the time. Decommitments happen all the time. Players choose elsewhere. So when I think about it, he's making the best decision for himself, and the fact that he might be going to junior college, okay, I get it. It's not the end of the world. Life goes on. I have to now say all these biblical sayings and slogans to make myself feel better. But really also what makes me feel better is that Syracuse is very much in the running for 4-star edge CJ May, who I've talked about on this podcast. He is making his commitment on July 13th, and Syracuse in the running. So CJ May, I'm not saying he is a better player than Sharlandiin Strange, but they play the same position, and CJ May is a consensus 4-star. So he's ranked higher. That doesn't mean he might be better, but he's certainly ranked higher. So if we're talking about consolation prizes, this is more than a consolation prize. In fact, this is a better recruit than Sharlandiin Strange. So hopefully CJ May comes and really softens the blow from losing out on Strange, but I wish Strange nothing but the best in his journey in football. Moving on to Amari, another player who might be moving on to the junior college route. He is 6'1", 180 pounds, a defensive back from Rochester, New York. Once again, a 3-star recruit, and I believe that makes it the second defensive back that has decommitted from Syracuse. So Amari 1, and I believe it was Marcus Upton, the other one that happened recently. So is it a trend? Is it just a coincidence? I am going to lean more on the side of coincidence, but that could just be me. I know that Dwayne Galloway, a defensive back from Ohio, is making his decision soon, so maybe that's influencing if he's going to go to Syracuse or not. Dwayne Galloway is a 4-star defensive back as well. Who knows? But it's just certainly interesting that 2 defensive backs in the span of about a week and a half have decommitted from Syracuse. Overall, I would say it's really not that big of a deal. And coming up, I'm going to talk about the overarching 2025 Syracuse football recruiting takeaways. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Day now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we are going over Syracuse football recruiting, a trio of 2025 commits in the class of 2025. Malik Washington going over to Maryland as expected, and a couple of players in the class of 2025 decommitting from Syracuse, both on the defensive side of the ball. So now here are the overall summary of the class and everything that's going on right now, in case you've missed it. Syracuse picked up 3 players, 2 of them on offense, 1 of them on defense. They got Rich Belin, a quarterback, the New York State Player of the Year. They got Gabe Daniels, a wide receiver, and a defensive lineman from Canada, Nathan Nyandoro. So 3 players recently coming. They lose out on Malik Washington, and then they lose 2 players via decommit in Sharlandiin and Amari Cologne. Overall, in the class of 2025, Syracuse now has 26 total players, and it ranks 26th in the country. So 26 and 26 is the best way to remember it. If you might notice that the recruiting ranking has slipped a little bit. It was in the teens, and now it's all the way down to 26. And the reasoning for that is because in these rankings, they don't do it by the average recruit that you got. So it's not about the quality. The quality certainly plays a factor into it. But if you have a high quantity of players, that's going to significantly increase your ranking. So Syracuse still has a ton of players in its class. It is a very, very deep class of 2025. However, the quality isn't as high as some of the other schools that they are competing against, or really just the other schools in the country. So as those schools start getting more depth added to their recruiting classes, that's when Syracuse starts to slip in the recruiting rankings. I still think they're going to finish inside the top 40, just like they were last season, but it's why they're not in the top 15 anymore in the class of 2025, because they have a lot of recruits, but their only 4-star recruit in Sharlandiin just decommitted. So they need a little bit more quality of recruits now. That's the main thing now with the class of 2025. Fran Brown and his staff done an excellent job of getting all these players to commit to Syracuse. You got 26 of them, and it's now July 1st. That is highly, highly impressive. That's really, really strong for Syracuse. And you need depth. As I have said so many times, you need it because this is football. It's not like basketball where you can get 1 or 2 players, but if they're really, really strong, it doesn't really matter that it's not a deep class. In football, if you get 10 4-star recruits, but those are your only 10 players in your class, that's not good, right? I would much rather have 26 3-stars and that be the whole class, then get 10 players in my class and all of them are 4-star recruits, because you just need depth. You need bodies on the field. And I know 10 is a little bit of extreme, but it's meant to illustrate a point. But now that you have the depth, you really, really need to focus on getting quality. Like really super, I'm not calling any of the players bad or anything like that, but I'm saying you need to get those 4- and 5-star recruits if you can. CJ May, as I said, the edge defender from Alabama, who Syracuse is in the running for, he would be an excellent start to getting quality recruits coming in. Not saying that the players they're recruiting are bad once again, but I'm saying get 4-star recruits in the door. If Syracuse can end up with 30 players in its class and 3 or 4 of them are 4 stars, I would say that is not an A, but I would give it like an A- class. I think it would be very, very, very impressive. If we're grading on a curve with Syracuse, I would say it's an A+. But if we're just grading across the country, if they get 30 players and 3 or 4 of them are 4 stars, I'd probably say that's an A-. But regardless, I think we'd all be very happy if that were the case. So the bottom line, You got all the depth you need. You got 26 players already in your class. That's more than most teams in the country. It's time to start getting those 4 and 5 star recruits. Hopefully, CJ May decides to commit to Syracuse. That is it for today's episode with Syracuse football recruiting. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you know right away when I'm dropping the next podcast. And tomorrow, staying with recruiting, but we're going to talk a little bit about basketball because Ryder Frost recently made an official visit to Syracuse, and I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. Everyone, have a great rest of your evening.